Awesome. So we've changed the name of the show here. We're calling it a show. It used to be called Between Two ZZs, which are these bushes here, but off of the Zach Galifianakis show, but nobody knew what ZZ bushes are. So now we're calling it Venturing. So we'll be venturing today with Jeff Levick. Jeff is, I guess we could call it in exploration mode now, but was the longtime CRO of Spotify, and before that, many other things, including a reformed lawyer, if I'm not mistaken.
We keep that secret, but yeah.
And there are many reformed lawyers that have done very well in the venture business and the startup world, so you're in great company.
Fair enough.
Keith Raboy, I think, Peter Thiel, and many others. So, maybe just to start, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey, because you, have spent time at some of the most iconic internet companies around, probably for the longest time, Google, where you were really in the ads business.
Yep.
So maybe tell us a little bit about the move from, having the heavy hand with the pen as a lawyer to moving into the internet. What happened?
So I, as one does when they graduate college and don't know what they want to do, they do what you do, which is you go to graduate school. So instead of going the MBA route, which probably should have, I did the legal route because it was part of, the family business. And I went to law school, I graduated, I worked at a big firm.
Didn't they tell you were going to become a lawyer if you went to law school?
I didn't realize that was actually what happened when you graduated. You had to become a lawyer. So I graduated and I worked in a big firm in Chicago, and this was late 90s. The first bubble of the dot-com era was beginning to inflate. And what I realized in year 3 of making copies at 2 a.m. was that the lawyers don't do the deals, the business people do the deals. Yeah. The lawyers mop it up with the paper and you get overpaid to make the copies. So that really wasn't very interesting. And seeing that there was this incredible thing happening with the internet and all these great companies being started, I left the firm, left a great cushy job and took a high-risk job, went to what was a client of the law firm I was working for, and spent a year and a half sort of working in one of the most dysfunctional sort of, you read about companies, overcapitalized, crazy idea.
What was the idea?
The idea was to aggregate the buying power of mom and pop shops and allow them to try to compete with the Walmarts of the world. So these guys were, they were disjointed, they were all over the place, but if you were able to get them to have one sort of major purchase order with the P&Gs of the world, they too could buy in bulk at the same sort of pricing levels that a Walmart could. Interesting concept, might even work today. Compaq was a big investor. We were putting computers in all of the mom and pop stores, but the problem was it was so poorly run and was so early, and you knew the kiss of death was happening when they brought in about 50 consultants to take over the business and figure out what to do, and then the world sort of collapsed, and so did this company, which turns out to be a pretty good thing. So I quickly scrambled, went to a marketing services firm, and I was pitching. Then I was doing a roll-up of search engines to do reseller deals, so keywords.
And it's funny to even use the plural with search engines today.
Yeah, so I just nailed deal with Northern Light, Alta Vista, going down the list, and I was pitching this deal to Google.
Sound like a paleontologist.
Pretty much. And I pitched this deal to Google, and they said, listen, we're not going to outsource our search business, but if you want to come help us build this thing, that's what we're doing here at Google. So that was in 2001.
In Mountain View.
So I was in Chicago, and I pitched this deal to Tim Armstrong. That was Tim who said, no go, but come join us if you want. And even then, the Google hiring process took 6 months, 1,000 interviews. It was super long, but I started in October 2001. There were 300 employees, and that was sort of my intro into sort of
high-speed internet,
which was sort of low speed at that time, but it quickly took off in the high speed.
And so we could spend a lot of time talking about AOL, but we'll jump to your more recent experience at Spotify, which I'm super interested in as a dedicated, ravenous user of the product. So people today think about music in a very different way than they did probably when you joined the company. when I grew up, I guess we listened to some radio, so it was ad supported then. But very quickly we got into the iTunes era, and people were buying album songs, and sort of Steve Jobs convinced us that we were all crazy for pirating music, and we should pay for it. But talk about the pivot to subscription, and how you thought about balancing the ad business versus the subscription business at Spotify.
Yeah, so I think the way to think about Spotify is really one of the sort of highest functioning freemium businesses.
Yep.
And the way that Spotify really is its own sort of conversion funnel to paid. So the whole concept is that you have, well, it starts with a great product. So I think it's a great product. You think it's a great product. Over 100 million consumers think it's a great product, so that's a good thing. But the whole idea is once you, to your point, realize that streaming is the way that you want to consume music, then you sort of enter the Spotify funnel. And you could do that two ways. You could just pay on day one, or you could just try it out for free. And most people try it out for free, which is great. And the free version is what I would say is sort of a good enough version.
Yep.
Great experience. It's feature constrained in some respects. It's got advertising, so it's somewhat interrupted. It's not true on demand. You can listen to songs, but it's on shuffle play.
Yep.
You can't take things offline.
Yep.
So the concept is, well, one, if that's good enough for you, that's great. You can listen to Spotify free for as long as you want, and it's ad supported, and that's the revenue model. But if you really want to have a better experience, the whole premise is that's what gets you further down to pay, into subscriptions.
What was just out of curiosity, what was the most common of the triggers you listed offline, sort of more user control around, what songs they can listen to when? What was the feature that you guys used to tip folks the most?
I think I don't think it's just one. It's not saying like I hate the ads, I'm going to pay, or I really just want to listen to that song right now. I think it's a combination of those things. And again, that takes lots of testing and lots of time to figure these things out. But it's always changing, because the way that you consume is always changing, meaning that there was a time when there wasn't even a mobile free version. So when there's mobile free, then you have to continue to figure out, well, what's the paywall on mobile free? And we figured out that, well, we won't make true on demand, we'll figure out this shuffle mode. So I think that version will always be ever evolving, because there'll be many different ways that you can consume music.
We now have it in cars, we have the Alexa, we have all these different things.
The one thing that will be constant is advertising, because the thing about free music is that it's not free. It's not free to Spotify, at least. It's that every time somebody hits the play button, a royalty is generated, and that you have to actually pay for the music.
We won't get into your relationship with artists, because I'm sure that would merit its own conversation altogether. But I am curious how you, as a leader of the revenue organization, maybe first, what did that mean at Spotify?
Yeah, so I mean, running revenue at Spotify was a couple things. It really was about making sure, one, that we could pay the bills. So that was revenue for the free business, which is running the advertising and building an advertising business, which has become quite strong and important. Secondarily, obviously, the running revenue for the subscription business, and that's everything.
And you were responsible for both?
Yes, so that's everything around driving subs, the offer, pricing, the packaging, bundling, figuring out ways basically to grow the subscription number and owning the number and growing that number over time. It also included distribution, so that's through partnerships. We believe that anywhere that music could be consumed, we wanted Spotify to be sort of the partner of choice, or the player of record behind that. So that was everything behind all the hardware deals, so whether it be through Sonos or through your television or through your car, equally through your phone, so telco deals all around the world. Even the relationship with Starbucks, with Uber, with all the sort of clever places that you could listen to music. And then lastly, international. So a big part of our growth story was lighting up countries around the world.
It's originally an international company. So.
Well, it was a Swedish company, grew up through Europe, came to the US, and then we sort of just started going all over from continent to continent.
And did you have a prevailing theory internally that the subscription business, the advertising business itself should be profitable on a user basis, or was it a different type of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so in the early days, it was, listen, premium is where the money is. Let's just build a free business that is, break even. If it's break even, good enough for us. We quickly realized that actually that the advertising business could be contribution margin positive as well. So really, we have two levers of the business. Obviously, subscription is a much larger revenue channel, but we took the position, why not? Let's see what we can do with the advertising side and equally make that a profitable business.
So I have to tell you, I think about this question, maybe not as much as I should, but we think about it all the time at GC. How do you build a business like Spotify when you're competing against Apple and Google and Facebook and all of the gang of 8, the gang of 5, the gang of 4, however you describe it, but the people who are cross-subsidizing their bundles, how do you do it?
Well, I think two things. One, it takes a lot of capital, at least in the music business, because you're constantly sending money out the door. You have to be bringing it in. But secondarily, I think you just have to be great at what you do. I mean, I always said, and we were very conscious of, Spotify was doing a nice job of doing its own thing and nobody was paying attention, and that was great for a while. And then all of a sudden you've got Apple, Google, and Amazon all basically announcing or putting out in the market that they want to get into the music business. So you have 3 of the world's most capitalized companies going after you, this, quite frankly, a much smaller, tiny in respect comparative to them, they're getting in your space. And our view always was, well, that's great, but at the end of the day, what Amazon's going to be judged by, or what they're talking about in their boardroom, is around logistics. What Apple's talking about is hardware sales, and what Google's talking about is we're going to hit our ads number. What we were talking about is how can we continue to innovate in music? How can we continue to make this experience just that much better? How can we make our algorithms, and how can we basically take a big data problem and figure out how to program a version of Spotify to 100+ million people that feels unique and personal to them every single day. And my belief always is, and was and still is that it's going to be very hard to be better than Spotify if you're doing all these other things, because Spotify every single day is only obsessed with making the experience of music better. So that I think that principle applies to any other company, which is, when you do have those massive companies coming at you or focused on you, you just have to be better.
Right, and from a product perspective first. So how does that relate to revenue, right? So these companies come in and it's clear that they have other priorities, and it's clear that they, probably are fast followers in many respects with their product. Some of them are still effectively giving a meaningful portion of the offering away for free. How, when Apple launches, Google launches, maybe someday Facebook will launch. When you think about all these things, how does that affect revenue? Are you thinking, well, maybe we need to make it cheaper in order to, continue to grow and capture value? How did you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you have to do is double down on yourself and not have a strategy of reacting to what others are going to do. And, again, when you have that much money, you can afford to lose some or to give away some, but you can't do it indefinitely. So there are always going to be times when the competition will have a better offer or be willing to subsidize something to try to steal an audience or otherwise. But I think that's playing short. If you're going to play long, you really have to double down on yourself. You have to double down on the experience that you're giving, and you can't get into an arms race of who's willing to lose enough money in order to build the biggest audience.
So given that focus, who did you look up to as a subscription company? I mean, did you look up to companies like Netflix? So was that
I mean, I think there's now lots of companies to look up to. At the time, at least I started in 2011. Really, Netflix was that was it. And I think Netflix is a really interesting example for us because what they were able to do is to get a very large global audience to pay for content. It's very hard to get people to pay for content, and especially to get them to also not just pay for content to own it, but to pay to rent content. And at the time, and I think people forget, it wasn't even that long ago where the default currency of content consumption was a download. Like you went to the iTunes store, you bought, show by show, song by song.
Absolutely.
And it did take sort of this tipping point for people to say, you know what, I don't actually need to own my music. It's okay. Now it's sort of like, what do I do with all the CDs? I mean, people are always saying, well, do I throw them away? Do I put them in a basement? Because people realize you don't need to own this thing. Renting it.
You see CD sculptures in people's living rooms.
It's great frisbees, coasters, whatever you want to do with them. But that really was, that's what Netflix was sort of I looked at it as sort of what we wanted to be, because they were able to get people to acknowledge and to embrace the notion of renting a service.
And who else? Netflix is the one that I think about most readily. Is there anyone else maybe that's been emergent over the past few years that you've looked to and said, those guys have really...
I mean, in the content space, no. I think in the overall subscription space, I mean, it's hard not to sort of look at, Amazon as basically being, one of the best and the biggest in getting people to pay a lot of money for renting a service that is comprised of, quite frankly, a lot of sort of subpar services. It's got a music service that is good enough. It's got a video thing that's good enough.
Right.
At the end of the day, at least for me, it's the free shipping is more than good enough. It's great.
Right.
But I think that is equally the gold standard of subscriptions.
So when we talk about subscriptions, one of the conversations we have internally is around sort of the relationship between subscription as a business model feature and subscription as a payment feature. Or I should say, subscription as a product feature and subscription as a business model feature. So an example there is with Spotify, it's actually a feature that you don't have to reach into your wallet and pay every time. That's friction and that's a pain. And it's also a business model innovation because it has implications for how you plan your business. You get money every month from your customers and it's not sort of lumpy and all that stuff. Did you think a lot about subscription as a sort of product feature as well? Like payment is friction. Payment is something that the customer doesn't want to do, and we're actually creating delight by not doing that.
Yes, and I would say that there's a lot of effort into making that part of the business even lower friction, because when you look at it from a global perspective, we sit here in the States and we're like, we just enter our credit card and we're done. Most of the rest of the world doesn't use credit cards, or they are much more, let's say, reserved in using a credit card. So figuring out just payments in general is a huge part of removing friction if you're looking to have a global business.
So is that like carrier billing, or how do you think?
Carrier billing was one big way. Figuring out, if Spotify's not in India, but if you look at even in India, the way that's like even Uber's addressing this is that they actually have people running around like delivering cash back and forth. So you really have to be, you can be super clever like that, but you have to understand sort of local currency. It could even be stored value cards. Which is a lot of the way that in South America people pay for things. That you go into your 7-Eleven, you get a store value card, you do it that way. Another one might be weekly payments, not monthly payments. And equally, we had to look at, we learned early on is that our pricing would even have to, we didn't ever want to vary the product because that wouldn't make a scalable business. But we did learn that we'd have to play with the pricing to be a global business. Is that this one-size-fits-all pricing isn't going to work if you want to be in 60 plus countries.
Do you have different prices within countries, or is it, you do? So in the U.S., do you have different prices?
No, sorry, not with it. Well, there's different tiers. So there's different pricing in the sense that there's a student discount plan that if you're is lower, there's a family plan which is higher, there's an individual plan, and then there's various other sort of potential partner type deals where you could get free Spotify with the New York Times or things like that. Sort of clever bundles that exist as well.
So. I'm going to have to run in a second, but I thought maybe we would end with sort of one high note and one low note. Okay. So on the low note, I'd just be curious to know if you could sort of share one disappointment from your time there, whether it was a market you wanted to enter that you couldn't, maybe it's original content, something like that. Maybe it's a platform you wanted to be a part of. Like, would love to just hear one thing that didn't work and what you learned from it.
Well, I think it's probably low and high, which is around original content, which is I think that we've talked about it for a long time. We've done many different things in it and many attempts, and I have no doubt that Spotify is going to crack originals. I think that it's something that I believe in, the company believes in, the company's put a lot of effort behind. But it's also been sort of many iterations of what that looks like.
Such a creative company, you'd imagine that they'd be able to.
It's a super creative company, and I think that honestly, I think audio is a super powerful medium, and I think that we even see that with this rise of the podcast. Yeah. But there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the format of audio, what you can do with it, and if anyone is set up to do that, it should be Spotify. It will be Spotify. I don't think it's been cracked yet, but I have no doubt that it will be.
So then, quickly, the high note. Like, what was the? Do you remember the moment in your time at Spotify that you had sort of the global all hands with the biggest round of applause, where people were just elated at something you achieved or some milestone you cracked?
I don't know if it was the one moment, but I personally felt and still feel very happy and proud of what I'll say is surviving the Apple launch.
Yep.
And there was a time when we knew Apple was coming.
Yep.
And we said we had about 12 months to figure it out.
Yeah.
And as a company, the entire company for 12 months hustled and worked incredibly hard
Yeah.
to strengthen our business. I'd say double down on the focus and make sure that the product that existed by the time that the Apple launched would be 10x better than whatever Apple was releasing. And I believe that it was, and I believe that it still is.
Yeah.
And that to me is just a great, to your point before, is that what do you do when you see that you've got much bigger companies with much more money coming at you full speed ahead, is that you double down on yourself and you just make your product better. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Great to have you here venturing at GC.
Let's do it.